Tonight at 10, the UK's biggest water supplier, heavily in debt amid fears of collapse. Thames Water, with 15 million customers, is looking for new funding. It could be taken back into public ownership. Its chief executive has resigned. Thames is a privatised utility. It's heavily criticised for leaking water pipes and sewage pollution. It's a big political issue.
I was concerned to hear that the CEO had resigned abruptly, but we need to make sure that Thames Water as an entity survives.
It's an absolute scandal what's happened. Huge dividends paid out, huge debts taken on, customer bills rocketing.
We'll be asking how Thames Water got into this mess and what the future holds for its millions of customers. Also tonight, the first images of the wreckage of the Titan submersible, which imploded last week in the North Atlantic with the loss of 5 lives. In Ukraine, the devastation following a Russian missile attack on a pizza restaurant. The dead include 3 children. The singer-songwriter Madonna has postponed her world tour after a stay in intensive care with a serious infection. And a great catch, they said, by wicketkeeper Jonny Bairstow, as protesters from Just Stop Oil disrupted the second Ashes test.
On BBC London, bidding wars and discrimination, the problems Londoners face as they look to rent. And the growing fire risk in London, lithium batteries found in e-scooters and e-bikes.
Good evening. The biggest supplier of water in the UK, Thames Water, with 15 million customers, is at risk of collapse with debts running into billions of pounds. The company is in talks to secure extra funding, and the government says it is ready to act whatever happens. Thames Water, which was privatised back in 1989, is currently owned by a group of private equity and investment funds. The firm has been repeatedly criticised for its poor performance in dealing with water leaks and with sewage pollution. Its chief executive resigned abruptly yesterday. The state of the UK's water and sewage networks has become a big political issue, with some experts accusing the privatised suppliers of prioritising dividends for shareholders over investment. Our economics editor Faisal Islam has the latest.
The British water industry has bobbed along in a stream of profits and easy money since privatisation 30 years ago. But now something far murkier is emerging under the surface. Today it emerged the government was on standby to take the nation's largest water company, Thames Water, back into effective government control as it struggled to raise the funds it needs to stay afloat amid a surprise resignation from the chief executive.
I was concerned to hear that the CEO had resigned abruptly, but we need to make sure that Thames Water as an entity survives. There's a lot of work that the government is trying to do on resolving sewage. At the moment, certainly up until now, the regulator has been focused on keeping consumer bills down, but there's a lot of infrastructure work that needs to take place.
Thames has been ranked the joint worst in the country for water treatment, sewage pollution and leaks, and all this came after rising multi-billion-pound debts and payouts, especially to the previous owners.
Absolute scandal what's happened. Huge dividends paid out, huge debts taken on, customer bills rocketing, sewage being dumped into our rivers. And so the government has got to come forward and explain what are they going to do to sort this out.
Thames Water has £14 billion worth of debt. That's high by industry standards and worth about 80% of its value. Interest payments on more than half of that are linked to inflation, which has been very high. It's also seeking to invest about £11.5 billion to reduce leaks and sewage discharges. Much more investment of this sort, an 18-mile tunnel under the capital to replace Victorian sewers, is now required, but at a time of high inflation and rising interest rates. This is clearly a mess, but the expectation in financial circles is that shareholders will provide the funds to keep Thames Water going. But the question is, how did this come about in an industry that should be so simple, providing a product that everybody needs and provided in monopolies of several million customers with no competition? And the answer is in hugely complicated structures, huge debts and lots of regulation. In a statement, Thames Water said it notes recent press speculation and it continues to maintain a strong liquidity position, including £4.4 billion of cash and committed funding. But this is what Sarah Bentley, the chief executive who resigned this week, told the BBC 3 months ago.
We're trying to reverse decades of underinvestment where there was cost cutting, the business was hollowed out, and we're having to rehire engineers, bring talent in, really kind of rebuilding a broken business that takes time.
A picture emerges of a creaking system that, when money was cheap, saw debt piled on mainly to the benefit of shareholders, and now, when the public demands more investment and better service, faces funding difficulties, with the taxpayer having to wait in the wings.
Quite a few things to talk about with Faisal. First of all, customers watching, wondering what the future is in terms of their supplier. And secondly, Faisal, what's your thought on how this moves on the debate about how these companies are owned?
Yeah, I think the first thing to say is there's no threat to physical supply. That's the point of the contingencies made by the government. What's known as a special administration regime is being prepared as a standby option, and that in fact would mean it wouldn't be a normal insolvency. If it got to that, it would be protected in terms of the supply. But you're absolutely right. There are bigger questions here, a bigger canvas being looked at. There could, for example, not specifically because of this issue, but in general, be price rises for all water customers to pay for this investment backlog. And many will be wondering, well, what's happened since privatisation? We know tens of billions of pounds have been taken out of the sector and paid for in dividends. And yet right now, there is a need for lots more investment. And this is part of a more general story that we've continually talked about, which is during the period of very low interest rates, what happened is previous shareholders used borrowing to help pay money to shareholders. And now, when the public is demanding more investment and fewer leaks and less sewage put out into the waterways of the UK, now interest rates are higher and it's more difficult to fund that. For now, the government, the finance markets, they're hoping that we will get a shareholder injection of money. That's the hope, but preparations are made in case that doesn't happen.
Faisal, many thanks once again. Faisal Islam there, our economics editor. Now, the first images have been published of the wreckage of the Titan. That's the submersible that imploded on a deep dive in the North Atlantic with the loss of 5 lives. US Coast Guard say that the submersible's landing frame and a rear cover were found in the debris. The vessel imploded on the 18th of June, a short time after starting its descent to the wreck of the Titanic on the seabed. Our science correspondent, Jonathan Amos, has more details.
A sombre moment at quayside as the debris from the Titan submersible was unloaded. Ship workers attempted to cover the fragments, but some pieces were still clearly identifiable. A titanium end cap from the cylinder-shaped carbon fibre sub with a large hole where a viewing window was once positioned. The rear equipment bay thrown clear in the violent implosion that occurred nearly 4 kilometres down. And the landing frame the sub used to sit on a flat surface. The question now is whether investigators have enough material to reconstruct what happened.
I think the key parts to look at are the interface between the acrylic window and the titanium hemispherical domes, the end caps, and also the area where the carbon fibre would have been bonded to the titanium flanges. So I could see from the footage that both of those components were recovered, which is as much as we can hope for.
Seeing the debris come ashore will have been a painful sight for the families of the 5 men who died. British explorer Hamish Harding, the British-Pakistani businessman Shahzada Dawood and his son Suleiman. All perished, along with French diver Paul-Henri Nargeolet and Stockton Rush, the CEO of OceanGate. Recent days have seen concerns highlighted about whether the sub was built to the best standards and with sufficient testing. These are all issues now that the US and Canadian authorities will probe as they examine the debris. Somewhere in this tangled mess may be clues to what went so tragically wrong. Jonathan Amos, BBC News.
At least 11 people are now known to have died at a busy pizza restaurant in a town in eastern Ukraine. when it was hit by a Russian missile. 3 children were among the dead, including 14-year-old twin sisters. Dozens more were injured. Emergency services in the city of Kramatorsk have been spending the day searching for survivors. Our correspondent Andrew Harding is there and sent this report.
Outside the ruins of a popular restaurant, anxious relatives and friends still waiting for news late this afternoon here in eastern Ukraine. Another body, the 11th so far, is brought out, to the distress of those hoping for word of more survivors. Among those already confirmed dead, these twins, 14-year-olds Yulia and Anna. This was the scene in the city of Kramatorsk last night. Moments after a Russian missile hit the restaurant and a nearby hotel. Shock and panic amongst survivors.
We've just been shelled. We just got shelled in Kramatorsk.
My daughter is still inside. Her name is Irina, said this woman. Later, Irina was found, photographed here under the rubble just before she was rescued. But the death toll has continued to rise. The Rear Lounge was a favourite venue for young Ukrainians, international journalists and Ukrainian soldiers taking a break from the nearby front lines. Rescue work continued through the night. It's become a grim routine now in a big industrial city that's been repeatedly targeted by the Kremlin's forces over the past year and a half. And this time, a new twist. Ukrainian security services releasing this photo of a local man they've just arrested, describing him as a Russian agent who allegedly sent video footage of the restaurant to the Russian military just hours before it was destroyed. Did the Kremlin deliberately target this particular restaurant? In a sense, it doesn't matter. Russia sent 2 big, powerful missiles crashing into the center of a crowded city at a busy time of day. Civilian casualties were almost inevitable. Rescuers are still busy clearing the rubble, says this medic. They're looking for people who are trapped, whether alive or dead. Another air raid siren. But the rescue work goes on regardless. Andrew Harding, BBC News, Kramatorsk.
One of the leading figures vying to be Conservative candidate for Mayor of London has decided to withdraw from the contest. Daniel Korski was one of 3 candidates shortlisted by the Conservatives ahead of next year's election. He said that he's withdrawing from the race because of the pressure on his family, following allegations by a journalist that she had been touched inappropriately by him in 2013. Mr. Korski has denied the allegations. Our political correspondent Helen Catt has more details.
Last night, Daniel Korski was on his way to a hustings, adamant he was staying in the race despite the accusation made against him. But this evening, he's withdrawn. He continues to deny he did anything wrong, but in a statement he said, "The pressure on my family because of this false and unproven allegation and the inability to get a hearing for my message of the London Dream makes it impossible for my campaign to carry on." The TV producer and novelist Daisy Goodwin used an article in The Times yesterday to name Mr. Korski as a man who she said had groped her during a meeting at 10 Downing Street where he worked in 2013.
People have to decide who they choose to believe. There is no reason why I would come forward other than the fact that this happened to me 10 years ago. I was shocked by it. I can't say that I'm a victim, but I was shocked by it.
Yesterday, Mr. Korski strongly denied the accusation.
I didn't do what's been alleged. I absolutely didn't do that. 10 years ago when it happened, nothing was said to me. 7 years ago when this first came out, nobody alleged anything to me. I just didn't do what's being alleged.
Mr. Korski did have a number of big-name backers, but he had lost some supporters since Daisy Goodwin's article was published. One told the BBC that his withdrawal from the race had become inevitable. This evening, Daisy Goodwin said it showed that women could speak out against misbehaviour in the workplace and be believed. The race to be the Tory candidate for London Mayor continues. For the remaining two, a quick hug before another hustings, as they vie to be their party's choice to contest the capital. Helen Catt, BBC News.
In France, President Macron has said that the fatal shooting of a teenager by police in Paris is unforgivable. The 17-year-old was killed last night after failing to stop when ordered to by police. His death sparked protests and clashes with dozens of cars set alight. Thousands of police have been deployed tonight, as our Paris correspondent Lucy Williamson reports.
Last night, one spark set Nanterre alight, and the government on edge. The shooting of 17-year-old Niall here yesterday, igniting the long Cold War between French suburbs and French state. The police traffic check was caught on camera, a brief discussion at gunpoint. Then, as Niall drives off, the officer appears to shoot him through the window at point-blank range.
Il avait besoin de sa mère.
His mother said in an online video that they'd taken her baby away.
He was still a child. He needed his mother. He kissed me goodbye in the morning and said, "I love you, Mum." An hour later, I was told that someone shot my son. What shall I do? He was my life. He was everything to me.
The death of young people at the hands of police here in the Paris suburbs has sparked rage and riots against the state before. What's adding to the anger this time are initial claims by police that Niall drove into officers before he was shot, a narrative that's contradicted by the video that's emerged. President Macron and his government have come out strongly against the police actions.
A teenager has been killed. This is inexplicable and inexcusable. And the first thing is to express affection, shared sorrow and support for his family and loved ones.
France's star footballer Kylian Mbappe was among those reacting on social media, saying his France was hurting for the little angel, Niall, who left much too soon. France's National Assembly held a minute's silence today as the country held its breath. Parliament and suburbs, the two sides of France, marking the death of a teenager in their own very different ways. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Nanterre.
News within the past half hour or so, which is that the singer-songwriter Madonna has postponed her world tour after her manager revealed that she'd been in intensive care with a serious bacterial infection. Let's join our correspondent Sophie Long in Los Angeles. And Sophie, tell us what you've learned.
Yeah, well, we don't have many details at the moment, Hugh. What we know, according to her manager, is that on Saturday, Madonna developed what he called a serious bacterial infection, which led to her spending several days in the intensive care unit. Now, we are told that her health is improving and that she is expected to make a full recovery, which is good news. But at the moment, we are told she is still undergoing medical care. And so as a result, her team has decided to suspend all commitments, which of course includes the Celebration Tour. Now, the tour was scheduled to kick off in Vancouver next month, and it's to mark the 40th anniversary of her breakout single Holiday. And it was much anticipated. When tickets went on sale, 98% of them sold out immediately, with fans buying up 600,000 tickets in one day. Now, we are told that when she released the video announcing the tour, she said to her fans that she was really looking forward to exploring as many songs as possible and giving her fans the show that they'd been waiting for. And they've been waiting a while. It was 2016 that was her last major arena tour with Rebel Heart. Well, it seems tonight, Hugh, that they are going to be waiting just a little bit longer.
Sophie, many thanks for the update. Sophie Long there for us in Los Angeles. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, has announced a national investigation into mental health inpatient services. It will examine how NHS trusts can learn from deaths in their care and how to improve inpatient care for young people. He also announced a public inquiry into services at Essex Partnership University Trust. Our health correspondent Sophie Hutchinson has more details.
It's more than a decade since 20-year-old Matthew Leahy was found dead while detained in a mental health unit. His mother Melanie is one of hundreds of families in Essex with unanswered questions about how their loved ones died.
Across this nation, there's families that are supporting, not just for Essex, and everyone's got such a similar story. Don't get answers at the inquest, just more questions. Don't know what happens to their loved ones. No one's listening. No one's held to account. Honestly, it is absolutely traumatic, and it has to stop.
The Secretary of State, Stephen Barclay.
This afternoon, to the relief of Melanie and other bereaved families, the government announced the review into the deaths of 2,000 mental health inpatients in Essex would become a full public inquiry, with powers to compel witnesses to give evidence. The Health Secretary also unveiled a plan to improve safety for all psychiatric inpatients across England, and he explained what it would examine.
How providers learn from deaths in their care and use this learning to improve services, including post-discharge. How young people are cared for in mental health inpatient settings and how this can be improved.
Those who'll carry out the England-wide investigation say NHS staff have nothing to fear about coming forward with evidence.
We want to hear from them without them feeling worried about being blamed for what's happened, or to feel that there's going to be recriminations for them coming forward to talk to us.
There are long-standing concerns about how and why mental health patients die, not just as inpatients in hospital, but also the millions, in fact the vast majority, who are treated in the community. Families in Essex are now hopeful that they'll get answers about the 2,000 deaths there. But just next door in Norfolk and Suffolk, they don't even know how many have died. This report by independent auditors is highly critical of the way the Norfolk and Suffolk Mental Health Trust reported patient deaths, saying it was inconsistent and unclear.
We're very aware that a report such as this being published will unearth many of those emotions and feelings from people from the past, and I personally want to offer an apology to anybody who was going through that. That is not our intention. Our intention is to get this system right going forward.
The England-wide review, which aims to learn from deaths like Matthew's, will begin in October. Sophie Hutchinson, BBC News.
In a highly critical report, the government's climate watchdog says that the UK has lost its position as an international leader on action to curb global warming. The Climate Change Committee describes the recent approval of a new coal mine as total nonsense and says it's markedly less confident than it was a year ago that the UK will reach its targets for cutting carbon emissions. The government says it is committed to its carbon targets. Our climate editor Justin Rowlatt explains more.
3, 2, 1.
King Charles helped turn on a climate clock at a summit in London this afternoon. It triggers 150 similar clocks across the major cities of the UK, counting down the seconds to 2030, the estimated deadline for limiting climate change to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. But the UK's climate watchdog had a stern warning for the government today. The Climate Change Committee said it's confident that the government would meet its own legally binding targets for cutting emissions by the end of the decade had fallen markedly.
The anger and the impatience of the world will be uncontainable.
At the UN climate conference in Glasgow 2 years ago, then Prime Minister Boris Johnson vowed the UK would cut emissions by 68% on 1990 levels by 2030. The Climate Change Committee said it just doesn't see the government showing the pace or urgency that will get us there. Take flying. The government says it wants to cut emissions from aviation, but it has no plan of how to persuade us all to fly less. And it's a similar story for emissions cuts elsewhere. It says the rollout of renewables is too slow. Industry needs to do more to decarbonise, and many more trees need to be planted. And then there's the question of making our homes more energy efficient. Look how the UK lags the rest of Europe on heat pump installations, a low-carbon electric heating system. We are that little red bar right at the bottom. Where's the plan to speed things up, today's report asks?
Well, the sad thing is that the government, having really led the world, has now lost that leadership because it isn't delivering. And that's the issue. It's to deliver what it has committed itself to nationally and internationally.
The committee chairman described approval for a new coal mine in Cumbria as total nonsense and slammed plans to give the go-ahead to a major new oil field off the coast of the Shetland Islands. The government, however, denies it is off course.
We've met all our carbon budgets to date. We're confident of doing so in future, but it is extremely ambitious, and the committee is right. It's its job to challenge us on areas where we need to go further and faster.
And challenge it has. It says there needs to be a major increase in pace and urgency if the government is to meet its legally binding climate commitments. Justin Rowlatt, BBC News, London's Guildhall.
An estimated 700,000 children in England are being taught in unsafe or ageing school buildings, and in some cases there is a real risk of a collapse causing injury or even death. A National Audit Office report says funding for maintenance and rebuilding is significantly short of what is actually needed. The National Education Union said that the government is spending nothing like enough on school buildings. Our education editor, Branwen Jeffries, has more details.
Flat roofs and porter cabins, prefab buildings past their best. Patching up these Gateshead infant and junior schools is a struggle.
25 plus years old, and they needed a lot of upkeep, and they're in a state of quite a lot of disrepair. This is a staircase that we can only now use as an emergency exit because it's just not safe because of all the corrosion. So everything in this corridor is glued on, and the reason it's glued on is because of the asbestos. It is safe so long as we don't disturb it. These boilers are for our central heating, and they are at the end of their life, and they will cost in excess of £60,000 to replace.
500 schools in a worse condition are getting funding, so their bid for £5 million was turned down.
We're having to patch up all the time, so it's like putting sticking plasters over open heart surgery. You know, ultimately, I believe that we are doing the best we can with the delegated funding that we have, but it'll probably cost the taxpayer more in the long run.
Around 4 in 10 school buildings in England are like this. Many were built cheaply in the 1960s and 70s, and while they wait for cash to repair or replace, their condition is getting worse every year.
Circle table in the middle and beanbags around the outside.
Pupils say they'd love a separate library and dining room, but what bothers them is how hot it gets in summer.
It's harder to focus when it's hot.
We had to put our feet in trays of water that made us cooler.
Sometimes there's leaks, and it gets too hot so walls are sickly.
Next year, this old porter cabin will have 30 pupils in it.
You can see around the walls, the ceiling, it's starting to peel, there's holes in the walls. It's got windows all down one side of the south facing, so during the summer months it can become increasingly hot.
This school is just dealing with ageing buildings, but 65 others in England have serious structural problems. Hundreds are being investigated for dangerous concrete. Here in Gateshead, parents told me they want more investment.
It's a lovely school, great teachers, lovely children, but they do need to invest a lot of money into a specific building like this.
We need a purpose-built building. We need kind of that extra money, that extra injection of money into the buildings, because it would make a massive difference.
See, I am excited.
Spending on school buildings has fallen below what's needed. Even so, ministers argue the investment in transforming schools is significant. Branwen Jeffries, BBC News, Gateshead.
Well, the second Ashes test started at Lord's this morning. It was briefly interrupted by protesters from the Just Stop Oil campaign. The Ashes newcomer, Josh Chung, got England their first wicket, but Australia have since taken control of the match. Our sports correspondent, Joe Wilson, has the story.
Here are 11 men to play for England in a sport failing to achieve representation. Out through cricket tradition to resume the Ashes. Lord's is part of a wider world, and cricket is a sport inextricably linked to climate. Just Stop Oil interrupted the morning session. It was brief, the powder was cleared, but not only did they get to the players, it was the players who took them from the middle to the boundary. Johnny Bairstow is famed for his strength. He is a batter, he's a wicket-keeper. He isn't supposed to be security. Well, the actions of the protesters were condemned in the strongest possible terms by the MCC, which owns this ground. I understand that additional security measures will now be in place for the remainder of the test to try and avoid another incursion. In terms of the cricket, Australia were put into bat and then batted themselves into a dominant place, initially thanks to David Warner. It took England's new Ashes recruit Josh Tongue to stun Usman Khawaja. Note that expression. You'll see it again on David Warner's face, bowled by Tongue for 66 there. But now England faced Steve Smith. Any Australians in the crowd? Come on, don't hide. Marnus Labuschagne was with him. These two are seriously good and England seriously knew it. Labuschagne fell for 47. Ollie Robinson was quite pleased. But Travis Head batted with increasing fluency. All good fun if you happen to be Australian. When England seemed flat, Joe Root late struck twice. Head out here stumped. Australia 339 for 5 on a day when Johnny Bairstow dealt with far more than he could possibly have expected. Joe Wilson, BBC News, at Lords.
The time is 10:30. Stav is with me tonight with the weather. Hi, Stav.
Hi there, Hugh. Thank you very much. Good evening to you. Starting to see some changes to our weather now. Weather front working its way in from the west has introduced a band of rain, some cooler, fresher air behind it as well, and that's pushing out the warm and muggy air which we had across large parts of England and Wales today. There's been a few thunderstorms around recently, around the Wash into Norfolk. They're tending to clear away, but it could be that this rain band peps up again across parts of southeast England, East Anglia, as we move through the course of the night. So the rain will become more confined towards this southeast quadrant over the next few hours, certainly into the early hours. Elsewhere, skies are clear. Few showers running into Northern Ireland and Western Scotland. More of a breeze here, but it's a cooler night to come across the north and the west. Single-figure values in many areas, but still fairly warm and muggy with that rain band in the southeast. So it's a bit of a wet start. Some useful rain, though, of course, across the southeast through the morning. Eventually, it clears away into the afternoon. A few showers falling on behind. Most of the showers tomorrow will be across Scotland and Northern Ireland. Otherwise, it's a much brighter afternoon for all areas. Some good sunny spells around, fresh westerly breezes and much cooler and fresher right across the board. 15 to 21 or 22 degrees in the southeast. That will be noticeable across the south. And then as we head into Friday, we've got another weather system pushing into the north and the west of the country through the day. But we start off fairly cool, bright, lots of sunshine, central and eastern areas for Friday morning. But then the clouds move in from the west to all areas, turns much wetter across Scotland, Northern Ireland, some light and patchy rain for Wales and Western England. I think eastern England and the southeast will stay dry until after dark, but mostly cloudy. And again, if you factor in the breeze, because it'll be quite breezy on Friday, another fairly coolish day to come for the time of year. The weekend doesn't look too bad at all. Low pressure will be sitting to the north of the country, so wet, windy for much of Scotland. The further south that you are, tending to stay dry with pleasant temperatures and some good spells of sunshine. That's it from me. Back to you, Hugh.
Stav, once again, many thanks. And that's BBC News at 10 on Wednesday, the 28th of June. More analysis coming up, as you know, on Newsnight, which is starting on BBC Two right now, and Kirsty is just going on air. And here on BBC One, if you stay here, you'll get all the news where you are with our colleagues in the nations and regions. But from all of us on the 10 team, thanks for watching and good night.